Hey everybody. So if you didn't see, there was a pronoun debate on Dr. Phil, I guess, between Matt Walsh and some gender activists. I haven't seen the video yet. I've downloaded it. That's what we're looking at on the screen here. And so I just figured I would watch it and give you my reaction live because I haven't seen any of this. I don't know what the nature of it is or anything. I'm not very familiar with Matt Walsh, so I don't know what to expect. But it's just kind of a chill reaction, so let's dive in and see what's going on.
I'm Addison.
And I'm Ethan.
We've been together for about...
Oh, just right off the bat. I don't know why people, like, I don't care, obviously, but, like, I don't know why people try to pull off the beard with the, like, super feminine look, everything else, but then the beard aesthetic. It just doesn't work for most people. I shouldn't say for most people. I'm going to say I've never seen it work before.
5 years.
I'm
Been
married.
married for 3 years.
I use they, them pronouns. Being non-binary just means that I just don't identify with the gender I was assigned at birth, and I don't identify exclusively.
I really hate that term, the gender I was assigned at birth, because, like, doctors don't go around assigning genders to babies. They're just like, has male genitals, has female genitals. That's it. It's an observation of the sex of a baby. It's not some doctor's nefarious plot to go assign a gender to a little baby and just be like, no, assigning gender roles and all that stuff. And also, I really hate the people in general who grow out their armpit hair and then show it off. They're like, oh, look at me, look guys, I have armpit hair too. You want to see? Like, what are you doing? No one wants to see your armpit hair. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. Nobody wants to see it. It's not like yes, it's a male secondary sex characteristic, more considered a male secondary sex characteristic because, like, females have it, but they get rid of it. So, like, this strong female, smash the patriarchy type of thing. Like, they all grow out their armpit hair and they, like, color it. And I just don't understand. Like, that's gross. Like, I have armpit hair, but I'm not. You don't see me out here trying to show everybody my armpit hair. I don't. I don't know. And again, with the the beard aesthetic with the mostly okay, yeah, whatever floats your boat.
With being a man or a woman, I'm something in between, outside of that line.
Okay, that was really revealing. God, I gotta stopping it so much, but that was really revealing. That she's carrying that pumpkin, or that the person is carrying that pumpkin that says gender is over, and it's like, no, it's not. There's, like, less than 1% of people who identify the way that you do. So, no. Just because let's assume, let's give them, for the sake of argument, that everything they say is right. It's still such an anomaly that the vast majority, like we'll say 95+% of people, and it's more like 99+% of people, identify with the gender that they were born as, etc. So why how can you even say gender is over? It's just like, it's one of those, like, meaningless catchphrases, and it exposes this person as the activist that this person. I honestly don't know what to call this person, because I don't like using pronouns that people tell me I have to use. I will not do it. So my general position on this is, like, if you come up to me and you say, like, look, I use these pronouns, do you mind doing this? And you're very nice about it. Generally, I'll just be like, yeah, whatever. But if you tell me that I have to use your pronouns, I'm not going to do it. That's generally my position. I don't say things that people tell me to say because they told me to say them. Like, I just won't do it. You don't get to dictate the words that come out of my mouth. So if I choose to do it, then fine, but if you're telling me. But anyways, I'll try to let it play a little longer and stop stopping it so much.
Binary.
My pronouns are he or they. I also identify as a non-binary. To me, being a non-binary means having the sense of freedom to explore my gender in whichever way I want.
Okay, I lied. I can't watch more than, like, 10 or 15 seconds of this without stopping it. This, like, I have the freedom to explore my gender however I want. The narcissism, like, seriously, the narcissism, it's like, I don't understand why it's such a point to not, why can't you just be like, look, I'm myself, I'm going to live this way, and just move on with your life, right? Like, live your life the way you want, call yourself whatever you want. The people around you can call you whatever they want, they agree to. But in order to try to force this, like, into schools and into, like, general parlance and all of that, it's like you're literally just trying to control everyone else on such a minute level. It's kind of disgusting. Like, why does it matter if some random person that you don't know uses your pronouns? Like, why do you care? Why do you care? That, like, if a random person I know called me she all the time, I don't care. I'll just ignore them, right? Like, if it really means that much to you, then, work it out with your friends and family. But I don't know why you're, trying to push this on broader society as a whole.
I don't have to perform or pretend to be someone that I'm not. I can be my authentic self.
It's really important for us to share more information with people because people are curious. They want to understand, but sometimes they don't.
No. I don't think that that's it. I don't think that most people are curious or want to understand what you're doing. I think most people don't care what you're doing. And they're just like, whatever, we're just not interested. But people like you go out and scream and yell and have hissy fits and tell everybody that they have to, call you such and such, otherwise they're a bigot. And you accuse everybody who doesn't conform to your specific ideal, your specific non-scientific ideal, as a bigot and a transphobe. So I don't think that's correct.
Don't always have the opportunities to do that.
This is a hot topic.
Yes.
That's a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why is it a good thing?
I guess because it creates dialogue and it invites conversation to learn about other people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are really confused about gender identity.
I think a lot of people are confused about gender identity, says the person who doesn't identify with any gender, and it has a completely confusing aesthetic. You're the reason people get confused about gender identity, by the way. People like you are why people are confused. Like, if you would just be like, look, this is what I do, leave me alone, I'm just going to live my life, 99.99% of people would never say a word about you. Like, the people in your own circle and, like, in your own personal life, they'd probably have something to say. But again, like, if it's not your family, if it's not your friends, like, why do you care? Why does it affect you? Just go on about your business. Just live your life the way that you want to. And that's the thing. The first person said, we want dialogue. It's like, no, you don't. Because every time you try to have a conversation with people like this, if you don't agree with them, then they want you shut down and they want you shut up. And I know this 100% for a fact because the university that I went to undergrad with had all their offices designated as safe spaces. And if you worked or were being served in one of those offices, you weren't allowed to use any of what they deemed as problematic language anywhere in there. And you could get into huge trouble with the dean's office. You could get into trouble like all over the place. You could lose your student status. You could get suspended from your classes. Like, you could have all sorts of things happen to you if you violated one of these safe spaces. And I worked in the office of admissions, and the office I worked in was a safe space. And when people like this, as few and far between as they are, would come through, I mean they're concentrated on college campuses, right? But if they would come through, then you had to do what they said and treat them the way that they said. They'd be like, my pronouns are whatever, and you have to say what they say or you get in trouble. I could have lost my job. I could have lost, my student status. I could have gotten in trouble for it. And so I would always back away from the front desk. I'd let the other guy work the front desk because I didn't want to interact with them. But yeah, again, it's not creating a dialogue. They want a very one-sided, they want to preach at you. They don't want a dialogue.
Identity in these times, and it's good for us to have these conversations so people open their minds and relearn and unlearn to what we've been taught.
See, that's just it. They want you to relearn what they say and unlearn everything else. This is just the epitome of ideology and indoctrination. They don't want you to think about it. They want you to do what they say and learn about the things that they want you to learn about, but anything else, no. And let me just emphasize once again, a very unscientific ideology, where all the studies done on this are extremely subjective. Methodologies are questionable because this is, I'm not gonna call it a made up theory, because pretty much all theories are kind of made up, so that doesn't really make the difference. But this is a very unfounded, emotionally based, personal. What's the term that they use? The personal story, the personal experience. That it's a very personal experience, anecdotal evidence type of thing. And I will also point out that most people who have gender identity issues, and that you can go look this up, they have all sorts of other psychological issues that come with it. So it's much more likely to be associated with some sort of disorder. Which, again, I'm not saying that, having a gender identity crisis is a disorder, but it's often associated with disorders. So we need to look into it as a symptom of a pathology or something like that. It hasn't really been investigated very well along those grounds because it's not very politically correct to make that jump to like, oh, this could be a symptom of a pathology.
Right. And Addison, many people think gender pronouns are exclusive to the LGBTQ plus community.
No, they don't. Everybody has gendered pronouns.
But that's a misconception, true?
Yeah. Well, everybody has pronouns. Like, you may use he and him as your pronouns, right? I use they and them as my pronouns. We all may have a certain gender pronoun too, but I think it's important for people to understand that for trans and non-binary people, we often change our pronouns to reflect who we are when we come out and be who we are.
This is a problem, especially with the whole like gender fluid thing. They're like, today my pronouns are this, tomorrow my pronouns are that. And that used to be, when all of this was starting, they were like, that's not real, that's never going to happen. And now it has. Now it's become mainstream. And the reason that argument took place in the first place is because a lot of this stuff, the first place the internet ever saw it was Tumblr. And people would argue about it on Tumblr, and then it started making its way to YouTube. And on YouTube, a lot of very smart people would say things like, you don't just get to choose your pronoun and tell everybody they have to say it. And the pushback was, it's an expression of our identity. But I'll push back on that and say, I don't care, right? Like, I tend to address people as how they present based on, what's most common. Because my attempt is to, have an interaction with somebody that isn't like confrontational, right? I'm not a super confrontational person. I don't just walk up and try to start something with somebody, right? So if somebody looks feminine to me, I'm gonna call them a she. If someone looks masculine, I'm gonna call them a he. If they correct me and say, no, I'm a, you called me a girl, I'm a guy. I'm like, oh well, whatever. It's not that big of a deal. But if you come at me and you're just like, I'm gender fluid, so my pronouns today are he and they, but tomorrow they could be she because I'm a demigirl. I'm just going to look at you like you're out of your mind and be like, no, I'm not doing anything that you said, and I'm just not going to interact with you ever again. Like, that's the correct response to people who act this way.
How do you explain the difference between sex and gender?
I consider sex to be our biological makeup. Our chromosomes, or hormones, our genitals is a biological makeup. But our gender is more of an internal sense. So think of it like this. Sex is what's between the legs, and gender is what's between the ears.
Gender is more of like an expression of sex. So your gender, the gender is kind of like so let's say you have a male who is, biologically male, right? And so they have a penis, they have testicles, they, grow facial hair, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then, so that's their sex. Those are sexual characteristics. Their gender is going to be, their gender expression is essentially like how they express themselves as a male. So, gender roles are a direct product of like socially enforced gender, I guess.
Right? It's how we see ourselves on the inside.
Okay. And
that's self-identity. That's different. That's not gender. That's your self-identity.
That's something somebody can't know. Gender is something somebody can't know just by looking at somebody.
Nope. Yeah. Because everyone is going to present and express themselves.
But gender, So you can't just know somebody's gender just by looking at them. That's true, but you can look at their gender expression and make a reasonable inference about their sex. And that's kind of the whole point of gender. Like, gender expression exists because we want to be able to look at someone and make that inference. I've really got to let them talk some more because I've already been recording for 15 minutes. I'm only 2 minutes into the video.
In a different way. I know it's very confusing, right? Everyone's like, what is going on? But it's really, you know.
But you, the great knowledgeable doctor, is going to tell everyone else what to think. That's your thing, right?
About us breaking that assumption that we can tell someone's identity, someone's story, their pronouns, even their name, just based on how they look.
What? You can't tell anyone's name just by how... What are you talking about? Like, you went from, like, gender's an expression of your identity to most people think that they can guess your gender, sex, or name by looking at you. That's not even... No one does that. The only time you can guess somebody's name just by looking at them is if they have the short little pixie cut and it's blonde and they're a middle-aged woman, then you know their name is Karen. But other than that, you can't tell.
Right?
Yeah. And so how does someone ask? How does somebody clarify that? Ethan, what's the best way? What's the most comfortable way?
I think for me, to create a safe space for people to share their pronouns, I will say, hi, my name is Ethan. I use he or they pronouns. What about you?
It's just the most cumbersome way to start off a conversation with somebody. Honestly, like, when you have a room of like 30 people even, like, and that's like a small class, that's like a community college level class, and you're just like, hi, I'm new here, my pronouns are this, what are your pronouns? And you do that with 30 people, you've taken up an hour and a half by the time you get through all of that. It's the whole safe and inclusive space, like, to an extent, I agree with that in the sense that if you're in, let's say, for an example, a workplace, like, people shouldn't be, like, harassed and made fun of in the workplace, right? I think everybody agrees with that. But then when you start to change the definitions of, like, what makes a safe space, what's safe and what's not safe, if using the wrong words is not safe, then we need to delineate very, very clearly. And the problem is that these people cannot delineate very, very clearly. So, for example, you know that at work it's against the rules to go, say words of a sexually explicit nature to your coworker. That's a given, right? We all know what that means. But when the lines are so blurred, especially when somebody identifies themselves as, like, gender fluid, where their pronouns can change, the line is very blurry. We don't know, like, what do we call you today? What do we call you here? And this is fundamentally the argument, is just that what I must say is being dictated by you, and that's not right.
I think it's really important for us to recognize other people's pronouns because, again, we can't make that assumption. But for so many people who are cisgender, meaning that you do identify...
You can make that assumption with 99% of people. And that's just like it's what I said before. People express their sex through gender expression as a way to allow others to make reasonable inferences and ease communication between people. You're turning something very, very natural, like communication, into this, rigidly ruled game where, we have to ask permission until it's so authoritarian. You're trying to take people's expression and turn it into something that you control.
Identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth. You're not transgender or not non-binary. I think a lot of people don't even question their pronouns because we already use them and it's already assumed correctly.
Yeah, that's kind of the point of gender expression as it evolved.
Mm-hmm.
But for so many trans and non-binary people, that isn't often assumed correctly. So we need to take the time to get...
This is literally tyranny of the minority. Like, you have like a 0.03% of people telling everybody else what they must say and how they must behave. I am not a fan.
To know people.
Cisgender, it says adjective that describes a person whose gender identity matches or aligns with the gender he or she was assigned at birth. Now,
Jesus
this
Christ.
would be what has been traditional for centuries, right?
Yeah, but 0.03% of everybody wants to change it, so therefore we're just going to change it and start penalizing the people that don't agree. Like that's literally tyranny of the minority.
Why does it need a term?
If we don't use that term, then we end up saying maybe real men or normal men or regular men, right?
Or just men. Why don't we just say men? Why do we say cisgender men or transgender men? Why don't we just say men? Like, why do we need all these, pre-descriptors? If you really wanted to be identified as a man, why wouldn't you could just call yourself a man instead of a transgender man? Right? Or like someone who's just a man. Because I'm a man and I will never call myself a cisgender man. Like, I'm just never going to use that terminology to describe myself because it's like, personally, I find it a little bit insulting. But beyond this, like, I'm a man. That's what I am. Like, I don't need to put any other qualifier on it. And the only people that want that qualifier are people like you. No one else cares.
Or we just say men, and then we say maybe transgender men, right? And the thing is that we need to realize that trans women are women, trans men are men too.
Are you talking about sex or gender? Because now you've got to define. I have a teacher who always says, define your construct. You've got to define your construct of woman or man because when you say trans women are women, if you're talking about biological sex, no, they're not. If you're talking about an expression of gender, you could make that argument, but that's different. But I mean, that's also why. Like, here's another thing. Like, they've gone against the whole transsexual term, which is what was used before, and they've turned it to the transgender, and I think that that's important because it's kind of a recognition that you can't change your sex. Like, you're born with a biological sex, but you can change your gender expression. Like, you can change the way that you express yourself in a gender sense. So okay.
And so we just want to have a term for that privilege, that assumption that your gender identity is going to match the one that you were assigned at birth.
All right. And then transgender.
That privilege. It's a privilege. It's a privilege to be part of the 99.93 or 97% of everybody who identifies with their biological sex. It's a privilege to be that. But all the people like you who are going out and getting paid for speaking engagements to be activists, you're so poor and oppressed because of that, right? Like, that's the argument, right?
Adjective describes a person whose gender identity does not match or align with the gender they were assigned at birth. And then
I really hate how they say assigned at birth. The gender is not assigned at birth. We had this argument. You lost. At birth, what happens is an observation. It is not an assignment.
Binary describes a person whose gender identity does not fit into the traditional binary of man or woman, and that term can be abbreviated to, and how do you pronounce that?
NB.
NB.
I hate the internet. No, there's you have your two sexes, male and female, your two genders, man and woman, and then there's also a space between for people who are intersex, because it's a medical condition where you're born with both sets of genitals, one functions, one doesn't. Usually that's the case. And but here's the thing about it being intersex: the secondary sex characteristics tend to follow one or the other, either male or female. And most people, when they're very, very young, if they're intersex, if they're very, very young, they have a surgery that eliminates or renders non-functional one of the sets of genitals. There's this is a condition. It's a medical condition. It's recognized. That's the only difference. Though, if you're going to talk about about binary genders, the first argument you're like, look, no, biologically there are male and female, right? But then when without fail, if you have an argument with somebody like this, the first thing they're going to bring up is intersex people. It's like, yes, there's this very tiny percentage of people who are intersex, and but again, they always, for lack of a better term, they choose a side, right? They pick one or the other. And it's the same with transgender. Like, why are we calling it a transgender man or a transgender woman? Because, like, if they're born a woman and they want to make the transition to a man, then they're living their life effectively as a man, right? So we'll call them a man. Why are we using a bunch of qualifiers that don't really mean anything? Like to you and me, whoever's watching this video, if you go on a date, and let's say we're men, right? Because I'm a guy, and we pick up a woman, and we go out, pick up a woman, about to bring her home, and she's like, "Look, I was born a man." Oh, well, I mean, okay, not my cup of tea, so I'm not going to do it. But you don't have to be a dick and just be like, "Oh, you're a man in drag." You can also just be like, "Okay, this is a person who has a recognized psychological condition." With gender dysphoria, who is living their life as a female, and I can be respectful enough to be like, not my cup of tea, but you live your life. And I'm very, very libertarian on this. I'm not super conservative or traditional on this topic. I'm very libertarian. I'm like, live your life the way you want to. Doesn't affect me. But when you start telling me all these new words and new terms and new pronouns to use, that's where you get pushback from me, because I'm like, this is starting to affect my life, and when your life starts to affect my life, that's where you're wrong, right? Like, again, ask me nicely, maybe I'll oblige. Tell me, I'm definitely not doing it.
Envy, yeah.
Okay, and
Envy.
Explain that.
For transgender people, we are assigned a sex at birth, and when we grow up, when there's a mismatch of how we view ourselves and how society views us, then we can choose to, either medically transition or...
Exactly, medically transition. So if you were born male and you become an adult, you decide to, get some bits cut off, get some bits refabricated, and, do the boob job, the facial reconstruction, grow your hair out, like do all these things so that you look more feminine. You're transitioning from one to the other. But this is different from non-binary, where you're saying, I'm just somewhere in the middle. Whereas in reality, that's just not a thing. Like, maybe your gender expression is androgynous. So, okay. But you still have a biological sex. And again, I don't care if you want to do this. Like, if you want to call yourself non-binary and live your life that way, knock yourself out. But at the end of the day, there's really no basis for it. You're making a piece of your identity into your entire life, essentially. And people like this who are activists, who are like, I'm non-binary, so I live a certain way, and I'm gonna go, be an activist for this to everyone else. It's such just a narcissistic way to live, because your entire point, and look at that, my lights went off, your entire point is that other people need to cater to your needs first, right? So that's one of my biggest problems with this. It feels very unhealthy. Okay, let me get these lights to turn back on. Okay, here we go.
Just socially transition or both.
My name is Matt Walsh, and I've written a book called Johnny the Walrus. This book is about identity and imagination. He identifies as a walrus, and his mom's a little silly. She takes it seriously and thinks he really is a walrus. So she went on her phone, and there are people telling her that this isn't pretend, he's really a walrus. And his mother takes him to the doctor to have him surgically transitioned and gets him walrus hormone pills.
This reminds me of that episode of South Park where Kyle wants to be tall and black, and his dad wants to be a dolphin, so they both transition.
And then eventually tries to drop him off at a zoo to live with other walruses. Not only topping the Amazon charts, my book has taken the world by storm.
You're saying that there should be no construct of gender, just sex. You're either male or female.
Right.
And someone feeling in a mental,
Gender tends to match one of the sexes. Like your expression, like gender is an expression of your sex. So even if, let's say you were born a man and you transition, you want to be, you want to live your life as a female now. Your gender is then going to be female because your gender is going to be woman. female as a sex, but your gender will be woman because that's how you're expressing your sex, right? So I don't have much of a problem with the idea of transitioning from one to the other. It's the like at the core of it, your biological sex remains what you were born with. But that's, as far as me to somebody else, they can live their life how they want. But this other stuff, like it's not real.
Emotional way that they don't identify with the sex that they have been biologically created as and assigned at birth based on their genitalia. If they don't feel that way, that there's no construct that describes that, experiences that.
Well, that's got nothing to do with the reality. So you can feel however you want. I mean, I could sit here and say that I
Based. This dude is straight to the point. I've never heard him talk. I've heard about the Johnny the Walrus book, but oh my God.
feel like a tomato plant, but that doesn't mean that I'm actually in those things. So your self-perception, you can have whatever self-perception you want, but you can't expect me to take part in that self-perception.
Correct. Yeah, you don't get to make other people play your game if they don't want to play your game. That's exactly right.
Or to take part in this kind of charade, this theatrical production. You don't get your own pronouns, just like you don't get your own prepositions or your own adjectives. It's like if I...
That's a good point. I like that. That's a good point. You don't get to tell other people what adjectives to use. Why would you get to tell them what pronouns to use? I didn't. I never thought about it that way, but I love that.
Or to tell you, my adjectives are handsome and brilliant, and whenever you're talking about me, you have to describe me as handsome and brilliant because that's how I identify. Makes no sense. You don't get your own
I love that.
pronouns. That's grammar. That's language.
So you think it's a delusion? Someone is self-delusional.
Yeah, I think it's delusion. It could be mental illness. It could be it's a lot of different things. With children.
So, body dysphoria, gender dysphoria is recognized as a condition. I know that Jordan Peterson has talked about clinics where they will use therapy and medication to help people through it. And maybe that works for some people. Maybe it doesn't work for everybody. I am not super schooled in that topic specifically. What I do know is that gender dysphoria is kind of analogous to body dysmorphia that people who have eating disorders have. So again, whether it's a mental disorder or not, to be someone who's transgender, I think that's beside the point. Like, so if someone who's transgender, if you say that, that's due to a mental disorder, I think most people who are transgender would agree that gender dysphoria is a mental disorder. Like, that's what it is. But it doesn't make it any easier for them to live in a body they're not comfortable with, right? So if they choose to transition, which many do, then again, in my mind, that's their business. But when you're living in this, in-between land and you're trying to teach this in schools as like, the non-binary stuff, that's a delusion.
Wow.
There's also just a basic confusion that all kids have. Like, that's why when you hear a parent say, "Oh, my 4-year-old son came to me and said that I'm a girl now, and so that's what I'm gonna raise him as a girl." No, you're a 4-year-old. I have 4 kids.
Yeah, yeah, he's right.
When a 4-year-old boy comes to you and says, "Oh, I'm a girl," here's a good follow-up question. What is a girl? Ask him what he means by that. What do you mean by girl? And when you ask him that, here's what he'll tell you. He will tell you what he really means is that he wants to do some of the things that girls do, like play with the dollhouse, or he likes the color pink. That's fine, play with the dollhouse, but you're still a boy. That's a question I would like to throw out to other members of the panel, actually, because just like the 4-year-old can't answer what is a girl, well, this is one of the problems with this left-wing gender ideology, is that no one who espouses it can even tell you what these words mean.
That's a good point. That's something like there was a big debate on this in Britain, I know, and Sargon of Akkad was in the middle of it, talking about what is a woman. And the only answer that these gender ideologues could come up with is someone who identifies as a woman. And so Zuby, the rapper from Britain, he decided that for a few minutes he was going to identify as a woman, and break the women's deadlift record and then stop identifying as a woman. To make the point that you can't have such a loosely defined term. And so that is a good point. It's a point well made. Like, ask somebody what they mean by "Are you girl?" What do you mean? What is a girl? What does that mean? And I think the prevailing conservative or right-wing and centrist definition of a woman is an adult human female. And so, I mean, I would tend to agree with that definition, but at the same time, I can recognize that if someone has gender dysphoria and they want to live their life as a woman, in general, I'm going to be like, okay, like, whatever. I'm not going to be a dick about it. Like, you do what you want to do. Recognize, that you're biologically male, but if you're going to live your life as a woman, like, then do it. Like, if that's what makes you happy. I'm very libertarian on this. I don't care. Just don't tell me to do anything.
It's like, what is a woman?
Well-
Can you tell me what a woman is?
No, I can't.
Exactly. Of course you can't. Identifies as non-binary trans masculine. Yikes. Can you imagine having to tell people that and then explain it every time you meet them? Like, what a great excuse just to talk about yourself.
Because it's not for me to say. Womanhood looks different for everybody.
What do you define a woman as?
An adult human female.
And what does a female mean?
Well,
how
that's
do you define a female?
someone with female reproductive organs.
Okay.
Someone who's, here's the thing. When you're female, it goes right down to your bones, your DNA. So that's why if someone dies,
Okay.
we could dig up their bones 100 years from now. We have no idea what they believed in their head, but we can tell what sex they were because it's ingrained in every fiber of their being.
That's true. I mean, it goes to your DNA. It goes to your chromosomes. Like, God. And that's why sex and gender must be differentiated. And that's why we use the term transgender. And that's why transsexual isn't thought to be as accurate. Because you can't change your sex, but you can change your expression of it, which is your gender.
Interesting. So I'm trying to understand. Your definition is that a woman is someone who is female, you said, right?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Is
Okay.
a biological female.
So what happens if we have maybe someone who is female,
Wait. Is this going to be the intersex argument?
identifies as a woman, right? Cisgender woman, right? As you just explained, maybe doesn't have the ability to reproduce.
What? How did that change anything? An adult human female is still a female even if she can't reproduce. I do not understand. Like, how many... What? That has nothing to do with it. What? Okay, what?
Maybe doesn't have those organs that you're talking about that are reproductive organs.
Okay, so a woman who had a hysterectomy is no longer a woman, according to this person. What the fuck? Because no longer have a uterus, so...
Yeah.
I have answered the question. You stood up here and said trans women are women.
Yes.
Tell me what you mean. What is a woman?
Womanhood is something that, just as Ethan explained, I cannot define because I am not
But you
myself.
used the word. So what did you mean when you said trans women are women if you don't know what it
interrupting,
means?
right? So here's the
How smarmy. Yeah, answer the question. You can't answer the fucking question. Like, that's the whole point. Your definitions are not useful because you can't answer that simple question. You can say women this and women this and women this. Trans women are women, but what do you mean by woman? And, like, okay, let's say for the sake of argument, trans women are women biologically. Let's just give you that. What do you mean by woman? You still can't answer that question. Your definition is useless. Your definition means nothing. You can't... Like it's ridiculous. You're like, I can't define a woman because I'm not a woman. It's like... I can tell you what a koala bear is, and I'm not a koala bear. I can tell you what you are, and I'm not you. You're crazy. That's what you are. Like,
thing. So I do not define what a woman is because I do not identify as a woman.
that is the stupidest thing that I've ever heard. Like, you don't have to be... Like, I can define what a felon is, and I don't have to be a felon. I can define what a rapist is, and I don't have to be a rapist. Like, why... or a pedophile, like that video that we watched on stream a while back, where it's like, people that rape kids, most of them aren't pedophiles. It's like, no, they are. By definition, you just changed the definition so that you could, make your argument. You're just changing definitions so that your argument works. That's the only thing you're doing. You're lying, you're being completely dishonest, and you're deflecting away from the question.
Womanhood is something that is an umbrella term. It includes people
That
who...
describes what?
Yeah, exactly. You're getting pissed because he's interrupting you, but he's interrupting you because you're not answering the question. He asked you a very direct question, and you're not answering. You're just giving him this runaround. You're like, womanhood is this umbrella that is like, yeah, of what? It's an umbrella over what? Just, like, make a point, for God's sakes.
People who identify as a woman.
No, that's not useful. That's like saying, a sheep is what I call a sheep is this umbrella term that the definition of it is everything that I call a sheep. So when I call my phone a sheep, when I call these papers a sheep, when I call this freaking textbook a sheep, then therefore they're all sheep. That's really, really stupid.
Identify as what?
As a woman.
What is that?
Was to each their own. Each woman...
No, it isn't. You've literally taken the meaning away from all the words that you're trying to define by redefining them out of meaning, right? Like you've given a meaning that doesn't mean anything to these words, and then it's circular. You're like, a woman is what we call a woman. It's like, okay, but what is a woman? No, it's just whoever says they're a woman. Then what does it mean? That the word means nothing anymore. This really makes me angry. The description of, like, the definition of the word has the word in it. You can't do that. It's circular. This has got me really, like, so mad I can't think straight. Like, what the...
Each man, each person is going to have a different relation with their own gender identity and define it differently.
No. Most people have a gender identity that follows a lot of the same general guidelines based on their sex. You're right in saying that every individual expresses their sex in a unique way, but there's general guidelines that go with it. But also, that's not the same as sex. So now you've got gender and sex confused. You're using both in your definitions interchangeably, and it's confusing the ever-living hell out of everyone else. Like, your definitions don't mean anything.
And so trans women are women too.
Okay.
And you want to...
Why are they applauding? What did they just hear there that made sense? Nothing that was said made any type of sense.
Hold on. You want to reduce...
You won't even tell me what the word means, though. So
you
that's the
want to
problem.
reduce women, you want to reduce men down to maybe just their genetics, our genitals, our chromosomes.
No one is trying to reduce a woman down to their genitals. That's not it. But when you're talking about the biological sex of female, or a woman, an adult human female, it's someone who has, like, the chromosomes, the genitals, the secondary sex characteristics, maybe, because there's women that don't, and there's women that have male secondary sex characteristics. There's all sorts of issues like that, but again, those are not normal. They're not, maybe, if we don't want to use the word normal, they're not typical. That's the word that we're told to use in medicine, is typical. But even so, there's when you extrapolate those things, so like male and female brains are different, right? Yes, that's true. Male and female physical bodies are different. Yes, that's true. All of these things come together to create a whole bunch of things that include personalities. It includes proclivities. It includes all sorts of different characteristics that are common to all of these categories. So when you so to all women, tend to be, okay, no, let me rephrase that. Not all women, but women tend to be physically weaker than men on average. They tend to have a higher average IQ. Men tend to have lower valleys and higher peaks. They tend to have, certain characteristics that put them more toward being, being agreeable than men, Men tend to be less agreeable. So you can use the sex to make all these arguments about gender expression because we've seen them on average. Now, does that mean that every woman is this way or every man is this way? Of course not. Of course not. But on average, right? It has meaning. It gives the word meaning when you can say this is an attribute that you would expect to see. And when you've said a woman is whoever identifies himself as a woman, you've taken away the meaning of the word. That's what people are arguing about. We can't give away so much linguistic territory to people who are just going to define things out of existence and then say whatever the hell they want. You can't do it. You can't. The best argument for this is women's sports, right? Like, women's sports are their own category for a reason, right? You cannot... You absolutely cannot just let people identify as a woman and then go play in women's sports. We've already seen what happens when when that is allowed. We've already seen it.
Right? That's what you're
What
saying.
you want to do is
that's
what you want to do is appropriate women. You want to appropriate womanhood.
Okay.
And turn it into basically a costume that can be worn.
Correct.
I'm really concerned about what's going on in schoolrooms across the country.
The entire gender pronoun situation makes me feel very upset.
People may think that if you don't want to use the preferred pronouns, that you're against gay people. This is 100% untrue. I am a huge advocate for gay people, trans people, and the like.
Stacy and I both have...
I really don't like that people have to put that qualifier because, like, I'm not a proponent for gay people or trans people. I don't hate them. I don't care if they do what they want, but I'm not a proponent for anybody, right? I'm not a proponent for straight people. I'm just not a proponent for, like, personal identities because I do not care what you identify as. But when you start overstepping that boundary and telling me how I have to act around you, that's why I get mad about this. I like, if someone wants to be gay, I could not care less. If someone wants to be transgender, I just do not care. Live your life. Do your best. Whatever. But when you start trying to teach kids and teach me and teach, everybody else in the world that they have to follow your ideology or else, we're going to have a problem.
Children in the same school district.
I learned that the teachers in my children's school were asking for the kids' preferred pronouns in the classroom. When I heard about this, it was extremely upsetting.
Last year, my son was given a homework assignment. I gave an example of a child not identifying with the gender that they're born with. This is an example of a homework that was given to my 8-year-old son.
Why? Oh, I want to know what type of homework this was, actually. Hold on.
If a student is unsure of their place in the gender spectrum or is experimenting with different forms of gender presentation, school uniforms can present a real challenge.
Oh my gosh. What is gender spectrum?
What? What? That is not a question to be... Did he say how old his kid was? Did I miss that? Let me go back a few seconds. Let me listen.
Pronouns in the classroom. When I heard about this, it was extremely upsetting.
Last year, my son was given a homework assignment. I gave an example of a child not identifying with the gender that they're born with. This is an example of a homework that was given to my 8-year-old son.
8-year-old?
If a student is unsure of their place in the gender spectrum or is experimenting with different forms of gender presentation, school uniforms can present a real challenge.
Oh my.
To an 8-year-old. That is why should an 8-year-old be thinking about this? It's the same thing as like critical race theory. This is critical gender theory being applied. Before anybody decides that they're smart enough to go say, yeah, this is critical gender theory. No, it is. This is critical theory, which is, okay, critical theory is a theory that's basically saying we look at the systems in place, we identify a problem, we try to change the problem, right? That's what critical theory is. And usually is based along the lines of equity. When you apply it to gender, it's critical gender theory. That's critical gender theory. Fuck you. You don't get to do this to kids. Kids should not be thinking about gender, sex, race, any of that. They shouldn't. The only thing that they need to see each other as is other people. The more you tell them, like, divide people by this, divide people by this, divide people by this, the whole intersectionality thing, the more you're going to make kids hyper aware of these things. Which the only way, and I firmly believe this, the only way to get past racism, to get past any kind of, what do you want to call it, like homophobia, transphobia, any of that, the only way, if you're true goal is to make those things go away, the best thing you can do is stop talking about them. Like if there's like some real systemic issue that needs to be addressed, let that happen, but leave the kids out of it. Like stop talking about it with the little kids. Like good God, like even in high school, like you could make an argument that this is appropriate, but I mean, I disagree, but you could make that argument. But with an 8-year-old, like it's pure indoctrination. And it would be the same thing if it were like any sort of ideology. Like at that age, kids need to be taught how to think. They need to not be taught what to think. When you're teaching little kids what to think, you're reading them scientific papers saying this is true. It's going to stick with them, and maybe by the time they're 15, that paper is going to be disproven. And I'm just talking about something like as basic as, I don't know, a medical study. Like don't burden your kids with that, because by the time they're a teenager, it's probably going to be disproven anyway. So, but this is so far across the line.
What is gender spectrum?
That's a great question. My son was really confused. I feel like I'm ambushed because now I'm explaining to my son. He asked me, what does sexist mean? As a parent, I felt trapped. I felt I had to explain these concepts to my son. I felt like I was whittling away his innocence. This year, my 12...
It is. The kid needs to be a kid. Honestly, the kid needs to be a kid. Kids don't think, like, this is the thing that pisses me off the most about the transgender kids stuff. Kids don't think about that. Like, they really, really don't. That stuff hits, maybe around puberty, maybe later, whatever. But if you don't tell the kids about that kind of thing, they're never going to think about it. Every single time I've seen a story about a transgender kid, the parents have been some sort of gender activists. Like, without fail, it's been a thing. Or the kids have been exposed to gender activists at school, and that comes out. Like, I have never seen a case where some sort of, gender pronoun activist person has never got their hands on the kid. I just haven't seen it.
Year-old daughter had a science teacher ask the class about their preferred gender pronouns.
Oh, dear God.
I don't want a teacher
These stupid TikTok teachers. Oh, my Lord.
talking to my child about gender pronouns. It is not appropriate. It's crossing a line. It's unacceptable. This is a parent-child issue, not...
Yes. This goes right in lockstep with those teachers in New York City that were caught showing little first graders how to masturbate. Like, this is horrifically evil. The sex, gender, all that stuff, that is none of the teacher's business to be teaching the kids. That is a parent and kid thing. You don't need to be learning that. If the conversation around gender binary and all of that, if that's going to happen, it needs to happen in a university or in a public forum, but not in an elementary school. That's horrible.
a teacher-child issue. I wanted my kids to have nothing to do with it. I had to pull both of my kids out of this school district.
I don't know anything about this mom, but she's a good mom in that in this facet.
Decided not to pull my children out of the school district, but I'm fighting for change.
Good.
I've been attending school board meetings for about a
Way to fight the black pill guy. Way to do it.
year now. What's happening across the country is teachers could get fired if they use the wrong gender pronoun. That just seems wrong.
This is my mission in life, to protect my children, and however I need to do that, I will. What Matt and I and a group of us are doing is we're working to have the school board removed completely.
That's exactly what needs to happen. All of them.
Well, I know.
All of them need to be removed. Every single one. If the school board is allowing this to happen and they're approving this type of thing, they just got to go. And you got to get new people in there. This is why local politics matters so much. This is why you don't accept the black pill. This is why you say, look, I can do this at my level. I don't have to be a senator to make change. You can make change just like these people. This is exactly what you should be doing.
A lot of parents I know are afraid to speak up, and I speak for them, and I'm not afraid.
Arlo, how old is the baby now?
Oh, Sparrow's actually going to be 4 in February.
Has Sparrow decided as...
Oh, this is one of those people that raised a baby where they didn't... Oh, my God.
What gender?
Oh, my God. I can't. I read the story about the kid in here, in this. I think it's a little girl, but they raised the kid as Sparrow, and they're not... No, I can't remember if it was a boy or a girl now. But... either way, they're just like raising this kid non-binary.
Yes.
Oh, that's a great question. Sparrow is in a point of learning and exploration with a lot of things, including gender. Language with
Why would you introduce gender to your kid at that age? Oh my God, why? Like as a concept, like let them follow their biological sex, because that's what's going to give them the best chance at normal, healthy development. And then if they decide as a teenager or I don't know, a young adult, that what this kid really wants to do is, be transgender or whatever, then that's on them. But like, dear God, like, why bring this into the life of your child? Like, why make gender such a thing to be so aware of?
Children at 4 is very, they're figuring it out. And so currently Sparrow uses he for everyone. No, it doesn't matter what their pronouns are, and we mentioned it. They just call everyone he, rather they don't conjugate it correctly. They don't use.
This mother calling her kid a they is just her 4-year-old kid a they. This is disturbing.
Him or his or anything, just he for everything. So we joke that he is Sparrow's preferred pronoun because that's what they use for everyone. As far as for themselves, though, they're not coming consistently saying, I would like, I want to be a boy or a girl, or I feel like I'm a.
It's because the kid is 4. The kid doesn't understand what a pronoun. I'm gonna call the kid a he, because that's the one that is being said all the time. But like, he doesn't know what the hell you're talking about when you talk to him about gender. He's 4.
Non-binary. We don't have heavy, in-depth, like overt communications. It's not like every morning I wake them up and say, all right, what's your gender today? Hoping they'll finally give me an answer. So it doesn't come up
Thank
like
God
that.
for that.
Okay, you decided this was important to leave unspecified, undetermined. Why?
It ruins the kid's sense of identity to do that. Like, how many, what's the percentage of transgender males, right? I'm assuming this kid was born as a male, maybe not, but we're just gonna, for the sake of argument, right? It's like 99.97 or whatever it is, 99.7, whatever the number is. It's above 99%, right? That are not transgender. So you're doing your kid a disservice, because it's fairly safe to assume that this kid will end up being cisgender, and so you're depriving your child of building a sense of identity from day one. Whereas if you just you're making gender into an issue where it's 99.7% of the time a non-issue, right? So
Because of the fact that gender is so social and it is such a social construct. Now,
oh my God, gender is a social construct, but it's been reinforced by millions of years of evolution. As humans, at least 100,000. Some people say as much as 250,000. But the point is that you're denying your kid a sense of identity from what the kid was born as. Like, I don't know. This is where it gets really murky for me, because like you don't want to sit there and be like, kid, do all the things that boy kids do, but you also don't want to be like, you also don't want to just like leave it up to a 4-year-old, because look, it's a 4-year-old. Like, you want to give them the best guidance you can, by helping them identify with what their best chance is, right? So let's just, and I'm only saying this from their point of view, right? So I'm trying to be as generous as I can. I personally believe, like, you have a kid, the kid's a boy, okay, raise that kid as a boy, treat the kid as a boy. You're not assuming that kid is going to be transgender, so just let them figure that out for themselves later on. But before their puberty hits, like, they'll never, it will never be an issue, right? Never.
we say we shouldn't interact with one another differently because of our genders. Like, everyone deserves the same respect.
No, you absolutely should interact with people differently because of their gender. Like, you do deserve the same respect, that's true, but our interactions with people of other genders are inherently based on gender expression. Like, absolutely. Like, why do you get anxious when you go talk to the pretty girl? Like, or you know, the popular girl? Like, why is that? Interactions between the genders are a specific way because we have a societal game that we play as you know, between men and women. Like, you can't just say, oh, all the rest of society's wrong, therefore, I'm right, and the rest of society needs to follow my guidance. Like, that's just stupid.
And treatment. But it has been scientifically proven that children are interacted with very differently.
Based on their gender? Well, yes. That is the case, yes. Because they tend to have different interests across the genders. I think that this person is making the assumption that children have different interests because they're interacted with differently, whereas in reality, children are interacted with differently because they have different interests, different attitudes, different personalities, and it's literally just the flip side from the truth. It's the opposite of the truth.
Based on whether they are assumed to be a boy or a girl.
Yeah, it's
girl children are held more, boy children are given, mechanical toys more often, all of these kind of examples, anecdotes.
Give your kids the choice on what they want to play with. No one cares. Literally, nobody cares. I've heard way too many people just like crying about like, oh, my mom made me play with this, or she wouldn't let me play with this, and it's like, I've never met a mother who isn't like, if the little girl wants to play with the dinosaur toy, she'll just be like, oh yeah, here's a dinosaur toy. Play with the dinosaur toy. Or if the little boy wants to play with the dollhouse, like, okay, like you're 4 years old. No one cares what you do.
And I felt it was important for Sparrow to get the chance to figure themselves out without all of that pressure, intervention, and programming.
It seems like
You're literally just... literally what you're doing is creating a life without guidance for your kid at that age, when they need to be influenced and shaped and formed, and you're in such a way that they're going to be interacting appropriately with society, right? So you're, from a social, psychological perspective, you're hamstringing your kid by not helping them to identify with, the sex that they were born as. It's so uncommon that you would that a kid would be transgender or have gender dysphoria that like it's not even worth like it's just not even worth you sitting here assuming, let's assume all kids are theys. Like it's very destructive. You're preventing the kid from developing in an appropriate way based on our societal norms.
we should just keep the dialogue going and
I hate that term. What do you mean keep the dialogue going? What is that?
hopefully find some middle ground.
I have a question. Arlo, you mentioned that you don't have your child discussing pronouns or figuring out their pronouns yet. And yet in school, our kids are being asked what their pronoun is.
Of course they are, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a point well made.
I'm confused about how that works. And then there's always this fluidity right around what pronoun you are each day. So it's constantly changing. How confusing.
I think.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, you're confusing the hell out of your little kid. Like, give your little kid something stable. They're born a boy, let them be a boy. And if as an adult they decide to change that, that's on them. But, like, give your kid the tools that they need to have developmentally appropriate interactions, and don't confuse them. Like when kids are 4, they're still trying to figure out how to use the potty properly. Like, why would you give them such a deep existential issue?
What it is. Oh, sorry. I think what it is that I sympathize with the hurt and distress that I sense from you all.
Jesus Christ.
I also wouldn't want my child to learn things from their teachers at school that were topics I was uncomfortable with, or I didn't know how I'd want to talk about them.
I think they know how they'd want to talk about them. They just don't want you talking about them.
Children are going to need to know how to navigate a world in which non-binary and transgender people exist.
Oh my God. Chances are most people are never going to interact with a non-binary person in their life. You're making this into something just like come on, non-binary is just let's see the studies. How about that? Let's see the studies and the methodologies. Let's go. I'm so sick of this. I'm just so sick of this stuff.
This is a great conversation to have at home, out of the school. This should not be part of the curriculum.
There you go.
We're out of time, but I thank everyone for...
Not in school. Not in schools. This is the gender equivalent of critical race theory. This is ridiculous. Should not be a thing. Wow, this video is going to be a little over an hour long. If you stuck with me this far, thanks. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.